In the headlines this hour, the search reportedly continues for the country's next prime minister and potentially other ministers as the president is looking for reform after the April ferry disaster. The Korean won rallies to the strongest level in close to 6 years on Monday on the ECB's rate cuts. And the Pakistani Taliban claims responsibility for an hours-long attack at the Karachi airport that left dozens dead. Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. Thanks for joining us today. You're watching ARIRANG News, and I'm Kang Tae-ri in Seoul. President Park Geun-hye, who's promised government restructuring and sweeping reforms in the aftermath of the April ferry disaster, has not yet announced her new pick for a prime minister. Following the controversy over her most recent appointment, the president is believed to be going over the potential candidates with a very fine-toothed comb. Choi Yoo-sun reports.
President Park is thought to be seeking a reform-minded figure with ethical integrity to be her next prime minister.
국가 개혁의 적임자로 국민들께서 요구하고 있는 분을 찾고 있습니다.
Nearly 2 weeks after her first nominee, An Dae-hee, resigned amid controversy over privileges he received after retiring as a Supreme Court justice, the president has yet to announce her new pick. It's believed the presidential office has tightened its personnel verification system. When asked Monday if the nomination process is back to square one, spokesperson Min Kyung-wook said that the verification process could be a variable. The announcement will likely come no later than this week, since President Park is scheduled to leave for Central Asia next Monday. To avoid a further delay in the anticipated cabinet reshuffle, there's speculation that the nominee, before being confirmed at a hearing, could play a part in recommending a new cabinet to the president alongside current Prime Minister Chung Hong-won. With the replacement of the presidential press secretary over the weekend, a reshuffle within the presidential office may be gaining momentum. On Saturday, the spokesperson said it was not certain which senior secretaries were subject to replacement, but that a verification process was indeed underway and new names would soon be announced. After the departure of one of the president's closest aides and former press secretary Lee Jung-hyun, observers are now focusing on whether Presidential Chief of Staff Kim Ki-chun will also step down. Choi Yoo-sun, ARIRANG News.
President Park Geun-hye will embark on a 6-day trip to Central Asia next week. Her office says that starting from next Monday, President Park will make a state visit to Uzbekistan to talk about the two countries' ongoing natural gas development and thermoelectric plant construction projects. President Park will then make a state visit to Kazakhstan next Wednesday to discuss bilateral projects involving coal-fired thermal plants and petrochemical complexes. Visiting Turkmenistan for the very first time as Korea's president, Park will seek ways for the governments on both sides to expand support for Korean businesses in that region. The presidential office adds the three countries that is, are considered key partners in line with her Eurasia initiative of linking energy and logistics infrastructure across the continent. With the local elections done now, the Korean government is now set to put much of its focus on spurring the economic recovery and carrying out President Park's economic innovation plan, all while trying to shake off the trauma of the April ferry disaster. Yoo Ri-an tells us more.
이번이 마지막이라는 생각으로 어렵게 살려낸 경제 회복의 불씨를 더욱 크게 살리고 우리 경제의 재도약을 이끌어서 대한민국의 희망을 만들어 갈 것입니다.
President Park Geun-hye has put economic revitalization at the top of her agenda, and she's vowing to pour all efforts into carrying out her 3-year economic innovation plan announced back in February. The first part of the 3-part plan is public sector reform, which has been under the spotlight since April's Seoul ferry disaster. A major step in the public sector reform is cutting debt levels at public organizations by tightening lax management. With the reforms in place, the debt-to-equity ratio was dropped to below 190% by 2017 from the current 220%. But since the government came under fire for mishandling the ferry disaster, the focus has shifted to rooting out corruption and cracking down on cronyism, or so-called parachute appointments. Minimizing government regulations is another major goal laid out by President Park. She had wanted to get rid of 1/5 of all government regulations by the end of her term in 2018. But some pundits say this goal will be hard to meet, given that the ferry disaster was blamed partly on a lack of safety-related regulations. Senior government officials say, however, that they will continue to take out unnecessary regulations. Finally, President Park has vowed to create an innovative economy. Helped by the government's drive to promote startups, the number of newly established businesses in the first quarter this year exceeded 20,000 for the first time in 14 years. The government is also looking to provide assistance to businesses in every stage of growth. Yurian, ARIRANG News.
And political parties in Korea are gearing up to make good on their reform pledges after last week's local elections that ended in a virtual draw. We'll get to see it in their process of selecting new party leaders and preparing for by-elections next month. Kim Young-gil reports.
With the campaigning over and the races decided, the ruling Saenuri Party and main opposition party now face a slew of challenges ahead. The ruling party plans to establish a new committee to reform the government's overall management system in the wake of April's ferry disaster.
We expect a new prime minister and new cabinet members. To coincide with President Park Geun-hye's upcoming reshuffle, our party is considering plans to restructure itself.
The Saenuri Party will also hold a party convention on July 14th to nominate a new leader. Meanwhile, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy also said it would do its best to regain the public's trust.
After the June 4th local elections, what people want is social integrity, a system of checks and balances, and a safer Korea. We will work towards answering the public's demands.
Both parties will also be trying to rally the troops ahead of July 30th by-elections. They are considered important as the number of National Assembly seats up for grabs could be as high as 18. 10 former lawmakers gave up their assembly badges to run in local elections, while 2 lawmakers lost seats for violating election laws. Another 8 more seats could be available as lawmakers are awaiting rulings on other charges. Political analysts say the outcome of the by-elections could serve as another barometer of public sentiment on the heels of the local elections. The ruling party currently holds 149 seats in parliament and needs just 1 more seat to resume its majority status at the 300-member National Assembly. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
North Korea has recently stepped up talks with neighboring countries. They are Japan, Russia, and China. But could they possibly be a precursor for a resumption of the long-stalled six-party nuclear talks? Hwang Sung-hee tells us more.
A flurry of diplomatic activity by North Korea is changing the landscape of the six-party nuclear talks. The multilateral dialogue, consisting of the 2 Koreas, the United States, China, Japan, and Russia, has been stalled since December 2008. However, North Korea has recently agreed with Japan to open a reinvestigation into the fate of Japanese citizens abducted by the North in the 1970s and 80s. In return, Tokyo promised to lift its individual sanctions on Pyongyang, which could reduce the regime's economic dependence on Beijing. China, as the chair of the six-party talks and North Korea's biggest economic benefactor, plays a key role in efforts to bring the North back to the negotiating table. Russia has also been moving rapidly to cozy up with North Korea in response to the West's sanctions stemming from the Ukraine crisis. For Pyongyang, this relationship means another opportunity to gain leverage over its dependence on China. And experts say it opens up a chance for dialogue.
Russia and North Korea's mending ties are an appropriate step toward the resumption of dialogue. because Moscow could convince Pyongyang to return to the six-party talks.
And while some experts doubt the validity of the six-party format as a solution to North Korea's nuclear ambitions, most agree that having some form of communication with the communist state is much better than having no communication at all. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to. The Korean won rallied to its strongest level in nearly 6 years today. Analysts say the trend comes at a bad time, especially because Korea's exports to major economies like China in particular are already suffering. Our Na Yeon-kyung tells us more.
The European Central Bank's easing of monetary policy has driven the Korean won to strengthen even more. On Monday, the local currency rose 0.4% from the previous trading day to close at 1,016 won against the greenback. Experts say this is not a positive development for local exporters.
I think that $1 exchange rate has reached its threshold, with the ECB lowering its benchmark interest rate. The euro is likely going to join the weakening currency trend of the Japanese yen and Chinese yuan. Those will bring down the price competitiveness of Korean exporters even further.
With the Korean won also hitting its highest level against the yuan in nearly 3 years on Monday, analysts add the strengthening trend will send jitters to Korean exporters, especially because shipments to China are slowing. Korea's exports to China fell by more than 9% in May from a year earlier, and things are not likely to improve if the won continues to rise. As for the possibility of the won strengthening past the psychologically important 1,001 mark before the end of September, analysts in Seoul have mixed opinions. Many are not denying the likelihood, but they also suggest the local currency will weaken in the fourth quarter, given that the U.S. economy is on a path of recovery, which could lead the Federal Reserve to raise its key interest rate and strengthen the dollar. Na Yeon-kyung, ARIRANG News.
Foreign investors are snapping up more and more stocks on the Korean bourse, but they are flocking to one particular name, that is Samsung Group. And all pointers suggest this trend may continue for some time. Our Song Ji-sun tells us why.
Samsung Group is attracting foreign investors to the Korean bourse. Over the past 20 trading days, when Korean retail investors were sidelined, foreigners remained net buyers, pushing the benchmark Kospi index up by nearly 3%. Data released by the Korea Exchange on Monday shows a quarter of all shares bought by foreigners over the past month were those of Samsung Group companies. Foreigners now own more than 35% of all listed shares on the main bourse. Corporate analysts attribute the spiking Samsung share price to the group's improving profitability and the need for the children of Samsung Group patriarch Lee Gun-hee to continue speeding up the succession process. Analysts say the rise in Samsung shares accounted for a third of the 3% gain in the Korean market's capitalization in the past month. Samsung Electronics has been the main target of recent purchases by foreigners, who now control more than half of the company. The tech firm now accounts for 18% of the main bourse's total market cap. Foreigners kept buying Samsung shares since Samsung chairman Lee Gun-hee was hospitalized in May following a heart attack, on hopes the group's ongoing reorganization and transfer of the company's control to Lee's 3 children could yield capital gains. In a move widely seen speeding up the succession, Samsung SDS and Samsung Everland recently announced plans for initial public offerings by next March. After their IPOs, Samsung Group affiliates could account for over 30% of the market capitalization of all listed companies. Experts say the bullish foreign buying will continue in the near future, given their preferences to invest in safer companies like Samsung, coupled with expectations Samsung will benefit from the U.S. economic recovery. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
Count Moody's among those that think the Korean economy is well on the path to recovery. The international credit ratings agency said Monday that Asia's fourth largest economy will grow by at least 3.5% this year, as well as next year on strong exports. Moody's tempered the expectations a bit, though, saying that Korea's heavily indebted public firms, as well as households, may have a negative impact on the domestic economy. It did add that Korea's Asian population as well could weigh on the longer-term potential growth rate. Despite the rosy forecast by Moody's, Korea's financial watchdog says Korea's major manufacturers are not making active investment, but instead sitting on a big pile of money. The Financial Supervisory Service says that the current assets of listed manufacturers under the country's 10 major taebals exceeded $245 billion as of the end of last year. That's a jump of close to 10% from a year before. A current asset is any asset that a company can convert into cash within 1 year. A Korean nuclear reactor was temporarily shut down Monday afternoon after a problem was detected in one of its control rods. Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power said Reactor Unit 1 at Hanul Nuclear Power Plant in the southeastern county of Ulsan was turned off manually so they could investigate the cause of the malfunction. This is the fourth suspension this year of a nuclear reactor in Korea, which depends on its 23 reactors for about 30% of the country's electricity. Now to some music news. Korean singer Psy has released the music video for his new single, Hangover. The 5-minute video, filmed right here in Korea, comically puts the spotlight on the country's drinking culture and features American rapper Snoop Dogg, who is right there in the video. Both entertainers are shown singing at a karaoke, taking drinks to cure their hangovers, and having Korean-style hangover food at a convenience store. The song is now available to purchase on iTunes. Psy shot to global fame with his 2012 song Gangnam Style, which holds the title as the most watched video ever on YouTube. Heavily armed gunmen in Pakistan have attacked the airport in the country's largest city of Karachi, killing at least 20 people and injuring 14 others so far. With more on that story and others, Paul is joining us. Paul, what's the latest update on this attack?
Well, the deadly battle lasted for 5 hours between security forces and Taliban militants inside Pakistan's busiest airport. Reports said there was an exchange of gunfire in the early hours of this morning, but airport officials say the siege is now over and that flights will resume later today. Our Shin Se-min reports on the initial assault that began late Sunday evening, local time.
A well-coordinated attack by a group of terrorists at Pakistan's busiest airport that has killed at least 20 people so far is apparently not over. Security forces in Pakistan say they relaunched a military operation at Karachi's Jinnah International Airport hours after claiming they had regained control of the terminal under assault. Pakistani airports have confirmed that 28 people were killed, most of them airport security personnel. The terminal was no longer being used for commercial flights, only for cargo and special VIP operations. But a spokesman for Pakistan's Civil Aviation Authority says thousands of people, including airline staff, passengers, and members of the airport security force were present when the terrorist attack began. Police and army officials say a group of 10 armed gunmen initially entered the airport using fake IDs, and at least one aircraft was destroyed in a gunfight that involved machine guns, grenades, and a rocket launcher. As of now, all operations at the terminal remain suspended and all flights entering the airport are being diverted. The Pakistani Taliban has officially claimed responsibility for the deadly attack. They say it was carried out in response to the death of its former chief who died in U.S. drone strike last November. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Now let's go to the United States now. A deadly shooting in the city of Las Vegas has left 5 people dead, including 2 police officers. Walk us through what happened on Sunday and also who was responsible for this violence.
Well, police say only 2 shooters were involved in the killings, 1 man and 1 woman. However, no further details have yet been released by the authorities. They began the brutal attack at a local pizza restaurant in Las Vegas, ambushing 2 officers who were having lunch. Eyewitnesses say the 2 attackers shouted, "This is a revolution," as they exchanged gunfire with one of the officers, who later died in hospital. The 2 suspects then fled to a nearby Walmart store where they killed a bystander before killing themselves in an apparent suicide pact. Sheriff Doug Gillespie of the Las Vegas Metro Police say they are still investigating the motive behind the shooting.
I see. Now moving on to the crisis in Ukraine, Paul. Newly elected president there, Petro Poroshenko, has declared that the deadly fighting in his country must end by this week. Is this Kiev's ultimatum to the pro-Russian militants?
Well, a day after his inauguration, President Poroshenko has been giving mixed signals on his no-tolerance stance against the pro-Russian groups. But it appears he is committed to a path towards peace. Speaking on Sunday, Poroshenko said it was unacceptable for any further loss of life in the conflict and stressed the need to restore the Ukrainian border for the safety of every citizen. He also suggested holding daily meetings with representatives of the self-proclaimed independent regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. Pro-Russian separatists are still in control of official buildings and checkpoints in a dozen eastern towns and cities, but some say they would be open to talks in order to achieve a peaceful settlement.
If the Ukrainian government ceases military operations and negotiates, we will hand the checkpoints back to the border staff who used to work here.
Meanwhile, fighting has continued in Slavyansk, where counter-terror operations are being carried out by government troops. Ukrainian and Russian media showed the conflict had spread to suburb areas, with even residential homes reportedly being destroyed by shelling.
Now, military troops from Vietnam and the Philippines wrapped up a day of soccer matches on a disputed island in the East China Sea. Some may call it sports diplomacy, but of course, China is not liking this at all, right?
That's right, Chetty. The Chinese Foreign Ministry blasted what appeared to be a friendly exchange between the 2 countries, calling it a, quote, clumsy farce to undermine China's sovereignty. In their first response to the gathering on the Vietnamese island in Southwest K, Beijing demanded both sides immediately stop causing trouble.
We demand that the Philippines and Vietnam stop any behavior that picks a quarrel and causes trouble, strictly abide by the declaration on the conduct of parties in the South China Sea, and prevent from doing anything that may complicate or magnify the dispute.
In addition to a volleyball tournament and cultural shows, Vietnamese and Philippine officials also shared information on maritime security, national disaster warnings, and search and rescue operations. Chetty?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that update, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours. Now let's check on weather conditions with our Kim Bo-kyung, who is standing by for us at the Weather Center. So Bo-kyung, it was a nice day here in Seoul, but I understand it was a different story elsewhere.
That's right. In fact, at this hour, parts of Gangwon-do province and the southern regions are seeing showers, which are accompanied by stormy conditions. Precipitation and cloudy skies are a result of the nation being at the edge of a high-pressure system from the East Sea. And another 5 to 20 millimeters of precipitation is forecast for Gangwon-do province and the southern regions through later tonight. On Tuesday, instability in the atmosphere will spread rainfall to more regions. We're looking at about 5 to 40 millimeters of precipitation in the central and southern regions, so make sure to grab an umbrella on your ways out. Taking a closer look at Tuesday's readings, Seoul tops out at 28 degrees, while Gwangju and Busan hit 27 and 22. On to other places. Daejeon and Jeju reached 27 and 23 degrees, while cloudy conditions are forecast for Dokdo and Mount Kumgang, both peaking at 18. And that's all the updates I have for Korea, and here's a look at the international weather.
And that will do it for this edition. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back with my partner Sean Lim at 10 p.m. Korea time.